Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming here today. Super excited to be presenting in Berlin. So I'm here to talk about, my name's Jason Yim. I'm here to talk about creating powerful mixed reality experiences across the entire auto industry. I own a company called Trigger. We're based out of Los Angeles, and we also have a small office in Aarhus, Denmark, to be close to Lego. So a little bit about me. I was actually born in Singapore. I grew up in Hong Kong. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I'm a little less welcome now than I was a few years ago, but hopefully it'll get better soon. Went to high school in San Francisco, went to UCLA as a graphic design major. I'm not a Unity dev guy, so won't be able to dive into your technical questions, but definitely lead the entire group in terms of the solution side. Started my first digital agency in '96. We also had our second one was the investor was Hans Zimmer. We were very kind of entertainment targeted, and then started Trigger in 2005. Our first AR project was 2009 for Sony, so we've been doing AR for a long time. I know mixed reality has been a kind of big hot thing right now, but it's been many years for us. We've been, pitching AR, working with innovation teams, trying to find people that are willing to experiment early. And we've actually built up quite a portfolio from there. So 3 patents in AR, mostly around AR gaming for toys. So a little bit of a glimpse of our office in West LA. Very open space, very casual team. A lot of Lego toys and a lot of entertainment stuff. So again, we have 100,000 plus hours now of mixed reality development across many, many different clients. And more importantly, many different use cases. So everything from on the marketing and promotion side to product development for people like Lego and Mattel, to location-based work, so work in retail and also in museums, and then finally for enterprise clients as well. So that actually matches really well to the entire auto industry, I think, if you go end-to-end for those services. And one thing that was key to us in the past was having a deep technical relationship. So we are showcase developers for people like Vuforia and for Google. For Google, we worked with them while they were still doing Google Tango. For Vuforia, that's an AR platform that was like the major player before Apple and Google came on board. But we worked with them since they were in R&D in 2011. So, and now we're the Lens Studio partner for Snap. We're actually the first group to actually create a Snap lens outside of Snap itself. So they used us as a guinea pig while they were developing the Lens Studio, which is public now. And then we're an early developer for Magic Leap. So getting our hands on early with hardware and with software, sometimes a year in advance of other developers, I think helps us kind of stay ahead. And then some of our clients in the mixed reality space, I think the key ones worth mentioning right now, we just launched for NBA AR portals into the finals. So you can actually plant a portal, step inside, and it's a 360 video from the finals. And for Summer League, we'll actually be doing live feeds from the games that we'll test for next season. We did all the AR for Star Wars for the past 3 movies. And then Meredith is a new client of ours. That's Sports Illustrated, Time Magazine. Basically, Meredith is the biggest publisher in the world, magazine publisher. So kind of a legacy business, but kind of reinventing it with AR and with mixed reality. So focusing on automotive, just to simplify kind of like all the places where I think XR could be applied. Anywhere from design development, manufacturing, the functions and features in the car itself. Sales and marketing has highlighted it because I think people normally go there first. They think about mobile AR, maybe that's the first consumer touch point, but then there's also ownership experience. But I think that the applications go across this whole ecosystem and go quite deep. So we can start with design and development. So we work with Honda Advanced Design in California. They basically create the North Star of the brand. So they're working on cars that are 2035. So that's all, auto, drive. I mean, it's just crazy future stuff. But basically, it sets the North Star for both styling and technology for the rest of the brand. And with them, we found these opportunities for mixed reality on volumetric design review, which previously they were showing with the holodeck and stuff. There's annotation and remote collaboration, which was also shown. And then one interesting challenge that we have is this idea of design validation in sunlight. So the auto, there are, I think, like 7 or 9 design studios in Southern California. And historically, the reason for that, just a slightly nerdy bit of history, was like World War II, Southern California was the only place that they could actually build airplanes out on the airstrips, just because it was, sunny and warm most of the time, that you could actually do manufacturing outside. So that became a manufacturing hub in the US, and the car automobile industry soon came after that. But what happens is, like, all these design studios have an inner courtyard that you can't see from the outside. And the inner courtyard is for them to compare their concept vehicle against physical competitor vehicles in natural sunlight. So that's something that, as I walk through this stuff, that we had to kind of dovetail with as a mixed reality solution, right? So we're jumping into these big industries with kind of legacy processes and things that have been set as standard for many years. So it's very difficult to go in there and come up with a solution that doesn't fit their existing process. We need to kind of puzzle ourselves and try to not rock the boat as much as possible, but still provide an innovative solution. So, so we actually started, a little bit of history, we started working with Honda and the advanced design team because of the LA Auto Show Design Challenge. So LA Auto Show is a big car show globally. Their design challenge was well known for basically competing car companies showing off their most innovative work. In 2016, they tried to kind of change the mix a little bit. They paired car companies up with entertainment companies and media companies to be a little bit more future forward. And we won in 2016, partnered with Lego and Honda. And then in 2017, we just partnered with Honda, and we won again. But 2016 is significant because it was the first time we used mixed reality to actually showcase life-size vehicles. So this was actually a really fun entry. The idea was we had to design the car of 2050 for Los Angeles. And we actually brought in the consumer of 2050. We brought in all these kids from like Boys and Girls Club of East LA, from various neighborhoods, and we brought them to the Lego offices, and they designed the car that they wanted for 2050. So these kids created these cars in Lego. These car designs were then passed on to Honda designers, who then professionally took their ideas and made the pro version of the Lego thing. And then we took those and put them into Google Tango. So just here's a quick video. So this is in the advanced design studios for Honda. This was pre-ARKit, AR Core, and with Tango, what we discovered, kind of like markerless tracking, life size, was we could give the device to these 8-year-old kids with like 0 instructions, and they would just naturally walk, examine the car how they naturally would, move in and out of interior and exterior spaces. And I think we saw the real power there. Just because prior to that, with AR, you had markers and you're tracking against targets and stuff, and if you lost the target a little bit, the experience is gone, and it's a little bit, well, quite a lot more friction in that experience. So I think that also taught us that this evolutionary leap in technology, especially in mixed reality, happens pretty fast. So that's something to keep track of, is the fact that technology is changing on this cadence that could be as fast as quarterly in this industry. So talking about the design funnel, so you would, again, super simplified, but you start with sketches, then you start doing some 3D content, then you have this volumetric review. And volumetric review is important because even with those big, giant power walls, like life-size video screens of cars, it's hard to get a sense of the physical presence of the car without being able to walk around it, or at least having a little bit of motion left and right. And again, in the natural lighting situation. So, and then you go to a full mock-up that might be fully fabricated interior and exterior, fully engineered before you go to the final design. So you would expect the auto design funnel to look something like this, but in fact, it's a little bit more like this. So what happens, you have a ton of sketches, you start off on many different 3D models, and then you get to volumetric review, and as the previous presenter had talked about, clay model is super expensive, 6 to 8 weeks. Some car companies are spending $50,000 US on clay, just blocks of clay a month for their design. So it goes typically down to 1 or 2 vehicles for volumetric review. So in addition to saving time and money, which we've talked about, other people have talked about in the past, I think the other thing that's really important is that without opening that funnel, you lose a lot of design ideas. So imagine if you have 40 designs, you go to volumetric review, you can only afford to build 1 clay model. How many good ideas get lost? Even though if it's not part of the final, maybe it's not the best exterior, but it had some interior component that was really interesting, but bloop, it's gone. So this idea of how do you preserve that? How do you preserve all that creative thinking and push it a little bit further? So with the AR eval tool, we can kind of stretch that out a little bit, add a couple more steps before you actually get to the clay model. So start reviewing volumetrically, make some decisions there before you go to a clay model and really fully commit yourself. So this is the evaluation tool that we created with Honda. So we co-created this. We own the tech IP behind it, so talking to other car companies, of course, to license out this tool. But the key to it is, again, it's exterior evaluation in natural sunlight, which is actually probably the hardest and worst place to do AR. So there was a lot of modifications to get that to work. And the other thing that's interesting is, again, when you have to work with these legacy processes, the executive evaluation is a very formal process for some of these car companies. So with Honda, they fly all the executives out from Japan. It happens at certain stages and milestones during the year, and they are evaluating many different things at one time. So with Hololens, we could have done something that used a lot of the gesture controls and all that sort of stuff, but with so many executives, we didn't want to have to educate every single person on how to use the UX and the UI. We wanted a system where you could just plop it on the head and then kind of move forward quickly. So the UX that you'll see and the UI that you'll see is actually gaze-based, it's look-based, so that you don't need to kind of communicate all the hand gesture stuff and teach users how to do that. So it's not, if it was a power user, someone using this tool every single day, we would probably go with gestures and other controls. But the fact that this is, again, for evaluation, we went with a simpler interface. So as you can see, exterior courtyard, there's a physical car, physical NSX there, and then the virtual car is being presented. You can swap colors. You can show, some executives don't want to walk around, so you can just rotate the car so they can stand in the same spot. The stats overlay is super important for them, just because there's they're all engineers, very numbers focused. You're trying to, increase different things by just a few millimeters, and that's considered a win when compared to your previous model. And then you can compare multiple cars at the same time. So one big issue is 3D file size, and also field of view and distance. So I think we have 100,000 polys max per scene, which is quite difficult to show multiple cars. So that cuts down the poly count per vehicle if you want to compare it. And then the other challenge too is that with the kind of poly count restrictions, the visual quality, yeah, that's why at this point it can't fully replace the clay model. I think it just adds a kind of decision point right before the clay model, but still kind of broadens the design funnel. So future additions in the roadmap, and we saw this in a previous presentation, we definitely want to add all the annotation features, including kind of the 6-DoF tape. And again, the 6-DoF tape is something that would mimic what's already existing in how they interact with the clay model. So again, we're not trying to teach new behavior, we're trying to enhance existing behavior or mirror existing behavior into XR. And then, because of visual quality, we're also right now working on the backpack solution. Something different, that this is not a VR solution. We're actually using Z cameras to have open camera feed. So it's actually mixing stereoscopic camera feed as well as like the 3D rendering of the vehicle itself, and then tracking the user. So to be honest, I feel like and the client too believes that like there's a lot of promise in mixed reality. You know, like this does solve a problem. But as you can see, there are many different components to getting it right. You know, we have just now when I showed the video that showed the Hololens version, if the feed from that was actually from the iPad iOS version, with Hololens, you actually need to be 60 feet away from the car to see the entire car. So Hololens has like a field of view that's small, you know, and that's an issue with most see-through HMD. So whenever you see the videos of like, you know, the people using HoloLens in front of a Ford car, and they're really close up, they can only actually see this much of the car at any one time. So in order for us to solve for that, we moved to ARKit, so we could use an iPad and stuff. So much simpler for just designers. Maybe it's not great for the final review, so you don't want to hand an iPad or an iPhone to an executive because it feels a little too small. But it works for day-to-day use. And then something like this would be the kind of more higher resolution solution for AR evaluation. But of course, the difficulty is you're asking the executive to wear a backpack, you know, head-mounted system, there's a weight issue, all these things that add to friction and add to discomfort. So that's something that we're very aware of, and of course we'd like to, you know, push the Magic Leap or other devices that are coming up sooner or later that will make this, they'll take away some of the friction in this issue. And then the other issue is data size. So right now, the 3D pipeline is if, for executive review, Honda actually does the decimation work because for final presentation, we found that the decimation work has to be, it's very high touch. It's almost like handcrafted to make sure that the designers get everything to look how they want, and details that we normally would not be able to see. They you know, are spending the time babying. So they'll decimate it, give it to us, and then we spend about a day working on materials and shaders and things like that to make it look the best for executive review. So that kind of workflow is okay for milestone review because you have time to plan for it. But for a designer who's trying to work on it on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't work, right? They don't want to send out a file, wait a day, or wait 6 hours for it to come back before they can walk outside to try it out. So that's why the Pixies plugin is really interesting for us. So we're kind of working right now to pull this into our 3D pipeline, but more for designer review. So this is kind of further upstream. A designer can go straight from their CAD modeling program, decimate automatically, go straight into our app, and then just walk out into their courtyard and do a quick volumetric review. Probably can't get all the shaders and colors, you know, perfectly right, but at an earlier stage, I think that's okay. And then later on, when that passes the design phase, you can go for a more finished look later on. So moving on to manufacturing. These are just some examples that I pulled. We haven't actually built these. So of course, there's opportunities for training. The idea that like you don't need to actually have, if you want to train 50 people in front of a car, you don't need to supply 50 cars or concentrate them in one place. They could do that training remotely in AR or mixed reality or VR. Complex assembly, so this idea of step-by-step guide as you're building stuff, and then field and remote assistance. So field and remote assistance and maintenance is quite interesting because it's pulling in live data and other feeds of information that instead of just AR, instead of just AR being a digital layer, it's pulling in communication from another person or live information about what needs to be replaced or what gauges are at and stuff like that. And I think that's another big lesson in mixed reality. Like if you're working on just a display system, it's not as powerful as it could be. So what are the other things that make it more relevant and provide more contextual information? And then for features and functions, so this is something that we do for Honda, for advanced design. We work on HMI visualization. So our challenge is we do visualization for, again, future Ford cars, so 2020 and beyond. And we are using Unity and things like Hololens and 3D projection and stuff like that to actually approximate what HMI will look like in the future. These are just examples of recent HMI designs, but the things that you're trying to solve for are the driver dash and panels, heads-up display, so what's projected onto the glass, and then the rest of the car experience. What about the rear seat passenger? What can you show on the windows? And then what's interesting that's coming up now is like, what about external displays, especially when all the cars are electric, they don't make any noise, how do you make them visible? How do you communicate to pedestrians? How do you communicate to other cars? Is there stuff that could be changing on the outside of the car to start visually communicating to cars around them? And why we use Unity is because it's super flexible, we can rapidly prototype, and getting these things to actually work in car is a very different process and takes much longer, but we can tell that story very quickly in Unity and get the overall concept approved before they move it down into production. So a couple of things to mention on the HMI side is a lot of the HMI work that's being done now, if you look at kind of present-day cars, and even if they showcase stuff at CES, they are dealing with a present-day problem set, right? There's a lot of effort, like even the stuff that's shown on screen, a lot of effort just showing how fast is the car going, what song am I playing on my stereo, what's the temperature, it's super, if you look at that problem set, it's actually not very big, but there's all this graphics and all these screens trying to solve for that. But if you think about 2020 or 2030 or whatever, that problem set gets way bigger. Suddenly everything is interconnected, right? So you are pulling in data from the city, you're pulling the data from all the neighboring vehicles, you could be pulling information from the passengers inside the car, you can be pulling info, let's say you're parked next to your house, that could be a constant stream of information between the car and the house. So at that point, you're not just trying to change a radio station with hand tracking or something. You need to figure out some UX system that clearly prioritizes all those layers of information. And the example on the right, I just pulled from the web, not to slam anybody, but I thought it was interesting that especially when you watch a lot of movies and stuff like that, you see a ton of UI and a ton of displays, but that's actually kind of opposite of what you really want in a driving situation. This woman is probably driving on a slightly curved road, everything's normal, but there's 30 circles telling you information. You don't want that. So you want the UI and the HMI to kind of complement that interior experience, and maybe even kind of encourage social interaction inside the car, right? So it's not always about displays and what's on the outside. So it's really easy to over-engineer. It's really easy to get excited to add all this layering of stuff. It's really hard to cut it down and get to an elegant solution that's actually practical and useful. So unfortunately, the stuff that we were doing on HMI stuff, again, with the HoloLens work and the 3D projection work, is all confidential, so we can't actually show it. But just to talk about some of the issues that come up from it. And then on to sales and marketing. So this is probably the most simple touch point for consumers and the first touch point for them. Some examples prior, of course, were like kind of like VR ways to look at cars, the consumer advertising and marketing, which I think now will be mostly through mobile AR, and then in dealership, the sales training, and then also sales communication at retail. So a couple of important things for both of those. On the consumer side, this year, the kind of AR mixed reality world has kind of shifted a little bit. I think prior to this year, it was much more about bespoke, apps. So the Porsche Mission E app, as an example, as a consumer, I need to hear about that app. I need to be a fan of the Mission E already, and then I have to download that app, and then I can see the experience. So there are many steps to get there. That's great for maybe a certain type of consumer or someone that's very close to the buying point, but it's very difficult to engage many people with that approach. So what's been happening recently with Facebook and Snap is kind of the democratization of AR and XR. The idea that Facebook Messenger has 1.5 billion users, monthly users, and I think Snap has about 300 million monthly average users. So those are big, significant numbers, and if that user base is already there, then just create the content and push it out to them. So on the example on the left is a Car Labs for Kia. It's Facebook. You can actually go on Facebook Messenger. You can talk to a chatbot. You can ask it about the latest Kia. And then from there, the chatbot can actually start off an AR experience, and then you can see a Kia on your driveway. The BMW example, I think, was the first time ARKit and Snap worked together, so you can actually place the car in 3D space. And for both of these, again, going back to the 3D issues, like we were at, when we showed you just now the AR eval, we're at 100,000 polygons. Snap Lens has a 4 megabyte limit, and Facebook has a 1.3 or 1.6 megabyte limit. So now you're talking about tiny, file sizes for vehicles and stuff. So that it does change what the end user experience gets at the end of the day. But if you think about it as mixed reality as not a single shot, it's more of a campaign approach. You want to do stuff on Facebook, on Snap to get consumers interested, and then maybe there's an in-retail experience that's a little bit deeper that can be ambassador-driven, and then they can take it home on their own app. So that should be the approach for mixed reality instead of I want to create one thing and put it out there, because it won't be as effective. The other thing that you're trying to solve for, specifically for retail, that's really interesting, and this is not only in automotive, but it's happening across the kind of retail landscape right now. Some people call it retail apocalypse. The idea that you can buy everything online. Why do you want to go into a retail store? Retail stores are shutting down quite frequently right now. So what can you do different in a physical experience that you can't do online? And the other thing is that also pulling from other industries is how effective AR is to selling a product and closing that sale. So I was on a panel with the team from House. They're kind of like the IKEA. They do furniture sales and stuff like that. So placing a chair in your living room and then purchasing that chair. They said that from their previous app, which was using just photos, you just go through your brochure and buy something, to AR was actually like an 11x improvement in terms of conversion. So I think it's being proved out in other industries and can definitely apply to the automotive side. And then in the retail experience, well, this is something that we did for Nissan and for Star Wars. It's called See the Unseen. It's basically this AR experience in North American dealerships. So this was in all the US dealerships this spring, winter and spring, and then also moved up to the Canadian dealerships as well. So basically, you could go in as a consumer, and then an ambassador with a Tango device, a dedicated device, would start this experience for you and walk you through it. We worked with Critical Mass out of Calgary. That's Nissan's agency of record, their ad agency of record, who led this larger campaign, and we were the kind of AR guys for this. So there's a dedicated device. You see the car. There's an NFC tap that actually orients the AR. And I'll talk about that a bit when the video is done. But basically, it transforms the entire car into like a Star Wars version of the car, like one-to-one and locked, and then and world locked around the car. And then all the Star Wars characters and vehicles come out to explain all the safety features around the car. Super successful campaign for Nissan, and some things to talk about there. Again, one was dealing with legacy real-world operational issues, right? So you know, there are a lot of things you can do in mixed reality that are super cool, but when you get onto an actual project with a client, there's certain world conditions that you have to factor in. So in dealership, for instance, we had to have this thing work in every single dealership in North America. So dealerships have all different sizes, all different lighting conditions, and they also have different cars that are in showroom at one time. So it was hard to, you know, it was a big challenge to come up with a kind of like minimum footprint size, and also be able to juggle between different cars, and also educate the people at the dealership to be able to do this across such a wide group. So again, something to consider when I was talking about Hololens. You have to be 60 feet away from the car to see the whole car. You know, it's much better with an iPad or an iPhone. You don't have to be that far away, but you still have to have some distance to be able to appreciate the car, like to see all the X-wings and all the animation come out. And the challenge for that is, again, in the dealership, if they put many cars together, you might be bumping into another car and stuff. So there are a lot of, besides just focusing on the technology, there's a lot of operational stuff to consider when designing these experiences. Oh, and then the other thing is about sales training. So this idea that like it's a challenge that this industry, I think, has in particular. I don't know if it's as much in Europe as it is in the States, but I think in the States, the general feeling is when you go to a dealership, it's going to be terrible. Like, you know, you spend a very long time there. You're not super trusting of what the dealer is going to tell you. And if you're going to go there to buy the car, it's going to be a painful negotiation. So that's something that the whole industry is trying to change. And part of that pain from that industry is the fact that like a lot of the staff, you know, jump ship quite often, especially on the sales side. Like they don't make their quota at a certain point, and then they have to move on. So what happens is you have your line of first defense with a consumer, the salesperson, is not the strongest link in that whole mix. And that's a big risk to the car companies, right? So what mixed reality helps you do is move the storytelling away from that salesperson to a device or to content that you can create. And I think that's super important, especially as cars become more and more complex and there are more and more special features to the car. And consumers are walking in already very informed from the internet and their own research. So whatever is the retail experience has to provide them more than they've already looked at online, and more than what a typical salesperson can probably deliver. And I think that's where mixed reality actually plays a big part. And then if you're a fancier person, in this case the royal couple, this was an example of being able to preview the royal carriage. So the interesting thing about this project was we worked with ABC News. The neat thing was we modeled the royal carriage just from photo reference, but we actually worked with the broadcast team to get it up on TV broadcast, so Good Morning America. And then here's the app view of that same vehicle. So similar to the other kind of automotive sampling projects. But it's an interesting intersect between two different industries. Having mixed reality move from mobile onto broadcast and sync with broadcast is also a very interesting place to be. So if you can imagine like big car TV commercials, and then from that TV commercial you can go straight to an AR experience from there, and have those two things dovetail, could be very powerful for the consumer. And then finally moving on to the ownership experience. So with the ownership experience, the basics are, well, the challenge is that, again, this is something else that the car companies are not particularly good at, and they're getting better at it. But right now, you sell a car, bloop, give it to the owner, and then it's almost like a disconnect at that point from the car company to that owner, right? There's the maintenance facility or the dealership that is in between your relationship, and a lot of the times that relationship between the dealership and the user isn't a great relationship. So from a Honda's perspective or an Audi or a Porsche's perspective, you would prefer a much more direct kind of relationship with that consumer. So they're doing that. Porsche has this example of maintenance instructions through the Epson glasses. Mercedes and Kia are also doing AR manuals, which is great, just an update for everything. But the image on the right, I think, is the most important one. And the image on the right is showing kind of infotainment, right, as we know it today. So at the most kind of advanced is, just digital screens. You can play video games, but it's almost like untapped space. And the reason why it's untapped is because if you look at the amount of time people spend in cars and the amount of time families spend in cars, like that is a captured audience for people that, per passenger could be 20 hours a week. And right now, that is not being addressed by the car companies, besides, radio and stuff like that they do not own. So one thing that we're working with Honda Innovations about is how do you own that space inside? How do you, once they buy a Honda, the Honda also comes with this ecosystem and stream of content that keeps that user's relationship with Honda directly instead of, losing it to the dealership. So for that project, it started off with a prototype for, it's called Dream Drive. This was at CES. And yeah. So there was a sled for just CES goers to come into the booth and sit down and try out, which wasn't truly the full experience. The full experience was the in-car version that we were driving around CES for executives and partners. But basically, it was actually running Vive in the car, with lighthouses inside the car, and the virtual environment was matching your physical move like one to one as you're driving around Vegas. So this is an example of where you start pulling in other types of data, Like you're reinventing how people see the world. So what if you could pull in all your Yelp data into the world around you? So that's overlaid over the restaurants and stuff like that. If you're not driving, you could push all the route navigation stuff above, so it's not crowding your center view. And then we were working with Honda Pay, which is a partnership with Visa, about transactions and stuff. So transactions straight out of, in this case, it was VR. And then there's also kind of entertainment examples, which I won't make you guys suffer through, but it's troll games, and then there was like a troll karaoke at the end. But the key to all that was, again, how do you actually provide a mixed reality experience that's contextual to everything around you? You know, it's taking in GPS data, it's taking telemetry from the car, it's taking in your transactional data and creating something that's more than just playback. So for CES, that was a VR prototype, and actually now we're moving on to a pilot. It's actually going to turn into a more of a AR mobile solution for passengers in the car, but it'll still be tied to live telemetry and live GPS information, and also transactional stuff. And then quick bonus, not quite in the car industry, but a little bit related. I think people's love for cars, I know for mine, started when I was a little kid. So we actually also do stuff for Mattel. This is a mixed reality toy that's coming out this fall. It's their flagship mixed reality product, and it's a true mixed reality toy. It's not just AR on top of a physical toy. The AR actually reacts to the physical toy, and then your play with the physical toy actually changes the AR experience as well. So I'll play this real quick. And this is a super early thing we did in February for Toy Fair, like a prototype just to show the retailers. But you can see object recognizes a track. It provides a virtual environment. And then using Bluetooth, it actually controls the track and all the cars on the track as well. So sending cars into loop, but if you go into loop, you pick up weapons that you can shoot. And then there's all these kind of mini games in AR. But everything affects everything else. So it's not, again, the feedback loop is what makes it truly mixed reality. And then to conclude, like why Unity for us, and why we think it's so applicable to across the auto industry. There's visual quality, there's cross-platform support, now there's 3D decimation, which is super important. But for us, this idea of like 0 to MVP, like we get asked by so many different groups and so many different with different challenges to help. That if we didn't have as flexible a tool as Unity, we would not be able to solve for that. And the fact that, like, as I was showing you examples before, technology is changing on a quarterly basis, we have to have a foundation underneath that can be able to play with all those platforms and play with all that software changing so fast. And that's what Unity provides for us. So, any questions?
In the manufacturing part, you talked about mixed reality being used for the contextual elements being shown, for example, on the Hololens.
Yep.
The environment registration, which is changing in the assembly line to show the contextual information, how are you doing that at the moment?
So environment information, like how do you pull the contextual data from that?
I was about to ask that. So number one is, do you have an interface with the ERP? At the moment, one is you need to show the contextual information in the right place, which means you need to have the environment registration. For example, the way you had the NFC marker for the app for Nissan. Similarly, for Windows Mixed Reality, for that particular, do you have any contextual markers? Is it visual? Is it NFC? Is it pre-mapped? I'm focusing only on the Windows Mixed Reality or the HoloLens at the moment.
So we used the ARKit version, just placed it. For the HoloLens version, we actually used an image marker to start the experience, and that was just to rapidly get the executives through, or else it would have been like you had to give it to an ambassador to set it in the right place between the right cars, and then hand it over to the next person. So we can do both. but definitely using an image marker to speed up the experience helps. Any other questions? No? All right, thank you very much.